The morning sunlight filtered through the worn blinds of a small apartment on the east side of town. It was 500 a.m., and while most of the city still slumbered, Michael Caine was already awake. He hadn't been sleeping well lately. The nightmares had returned, fragments of his final military mission, faces of comrades, lost decisions that haunted him even 2 years later. Michael sat on the edge of his bed, running calloused hands over his face, trying to shake off the grip of the past. Across the room, on a twin bed pushed against the wall, his 9-year-old daughter Abby slept peacefully, her small chest rising and falling beneath a faded blanket adorned with constellations. A stuffed rabbit missing one ear and patched in several places was clutched tightly in her arms. Michael watched her for a moment, finding in her peaceful face the strength to face another day. A soldier never truly stops fighting, he thought to himself. The battlefield just changes. Michael moved quietly through their modest apartment, two small bedrooms, a bathroom with temperamental plumbing, and a kitchen-living room combination that felt smaller with each passing year. The walls were thin enough that he could hear the neighbors' television through them, but it was a roof over their heads. That was something. In the kitchen, he started his morning ritual. Coffee first black and strong enough to stand a spoon in it, just like he'd learned to make in the army. Then breakfast for Abby, 2 eggs toast with a thin scrape of peanut butter and sliced apples arranged in a smile on the plate. While the eggs cooked, he noticed Abby's school shoes sitting by the door, the left one with a seam coming apart at the toe. Michael grabbed his repair kit, a small box of tools and materials he'd assembled over the years. With practiced hands, he applied a special adhesive to the seam, using the same technique he'd once used to repair tactical gear in the field. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would hold until payday. He packed Abby's lunch next, a sandwich, carrot sticks, and a small cookie he had been saving as a special treat. Inside the lunchbox, he slipped a small note. Daddy's watching, always brave. It was their thing, their connection, a reminder that even when they were apart, they were never truly alone. The bills were stacked neatly on the counter, organized by urgency. Medical bills from Abby's last asthma attack. Rent notice with a $70 increase, circled in red. School uniform requirements for the coming year. Michael studied them briefly, calculating and recalculating, trying to stretch dollars that refused to stretch any further. Dad, Abby's voice, still heavy with sleep, came from behind him. Michael turned, his face instantly brightening. Hey, sunshine, you're up early. Abby rubbed her eyes, her dark hair a wild tangle around her face. She looked so much like her mother that sometimes it stole Michael's breath. The same deep brown eyes, the same small dimple in her right cheek when she smiled. Had a dream, she said quietly, patting across the floor in mismatched socks. Good one or bad one? Michael asked, lifting her onto the counter stool. Abby shrugged, reaching for her glass of milk. Just different. Michael nodded, understanding. Abby hadn't been very talkative since Sarah died 2 years ago. The car accident had taken her mother and left Abby with not just physical scars, but emotional ones that ran far deeper. The therapist had said it was normal that Abby would talk when she was ready. Still, Michael worried. Eggs are almost ready. And look, I fixed your shoe. He held up the repaired footwear. Abby examined it closely, running her small finger along the mended seam. How do you always know how to fix things? She asked. Well, Michael said, sliding the eggs onto her plate. When I was in the army, we had to learn to repair our own equipment. Sometimes you're far from home and have to make do with what you have. Like us? Abby asked. Michael paused, the simplicity and depth of her question catching him off guard. Yeah, sunshine. Like us. By 6:30 a.m., they were both ready to face the day. Abby's hair was neatly braided, a skill Michael had mastered through countless YouTube tutorials and practice, and her backpack was packed. Michael was dressed in the navy blue uniform of Hudson Enterprises, where he worked as a janitor. The company logo was stitched above his heart, a stylized H that represented one of the largest technology firms in the city. Remember, Mrs. Martinez will pick you up from school today, Michael reminded Abby as they walked to the bus stop. I have to work late. The extra shift, Abby asked, her small hands secure in his much larger one. Just for a little while, Michael assured her. Then maybe we can save enough for that science camp you want to go to this summer. Abby nodded solemnly. At 9 years old, she understood more about financial struggle than any child should have to. The school bus arrived in a hiss of brakes and a squeal of doors. Michael knelt down, straightening Abby's collar one last time. Be good, be smart, be kind, he said, their daily mantra. And be brave. Abby finished giving him a quick hug before climbing the steps onto the bus. Michael watched until the bus disappeared around the corner, carrying his entire world away from him. Then he turned and headed toward the gleaming tower of Hudson Enterprises, a building that seemed to touch the sky itself. Every morning as the sun rose behind Hudson Tower, the glass exterior caught fire with reflected light. The building seemed alive, a beacon of success and innovation in the heart of the city. People rushed in and out through the revolving doors. Executives in tailored suits, developers in casual attire, carrying expensive laptops, administrative staff, with security badges clipped to their belts. All of them moved with purpose, their steps quick and confident on the polished marble floor. Michael entered through the service entrance at the back of the building, swiping his badge at the reader. The hallways here were plain utilitarian, nothing like the grand lobby with its modern art installations and water features. He clocked in, collected his cleaning cart from the supply room, and began his day the same way he had for the past 18 months. To most of the employees, at Hudson, Michael was invisible. He moved through the building, emptying trash bins, mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, and polishing surfaces until they gleamed. Few people looked at him directly. Fewer still knew his name, despite the fact that it was embroidered on his uniform. He was simply part of the background, as essential and as overlooked as the air conditioning system. But Michael saw everything. His military training had honed his observational skills to razor sharpness. He noticed patterns: which executives arrived early and left late, which ones treated their administrative assistants with respect, which ones left messes for others to clean up. He saw which employees were struggling, which ones were climbing the corporate ladder, which ones were having affairs with colleagues. He heard conversations not meant for his ears, simply because no one considered him present enough to be a concern. On the 45th floor, home to the executive offices, Michael emptied the trash in the conference room where the board had just concluded a morning meeting. Coffee cups, pastry wrappers, and discarded printouts filled his bin. As he worked, he could hear raised voices from the CEO's office down the hall. "The board is getting impatient, Elizabeth." A man's voice sharp with frustration. "Vertex Systems is breathing down our necks, and we're still weeks away from the Pentagon demonstration." "I'm aware of the timeline, James." The woman's voice was cool, controlled, but with an undercurrent of tension. "The security protocols are being finalized. We won't rush this and risk vulnerabilities. If we lose this military contract, we won't." Michael recognized the female voice as belonging to Elizabeth Hudson, the CEO of Hudson Technologies. At 36, she was one of the youngest chief executives in the industry, and certainly one of the few women. He'd seen her occasionally, always immaculately dressed, always moving briskly, always surrounded by an entourage of assistants and executives, hanging on her every word. As Michael finished cleaning the conference room, Elizabeth emerged from her office, followed by James Cooper, the company's chief financial officer. She was striking tall and poised in a charcoal gray suit, her dark hair cut in a precise bob that framed an angular face, but it was her eyes that Michael noticed most sharp, intelligent, and right now filled with barely concealed anger. "Have the security team review the protocols again," she was saying, "and schedule a call with General Matthews for this afternoon. I want to personally assure him that we're on track." James nodded, making notes on his tablet. "In the email you received this morning, should we have it investigate?" Elizabeth's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's the third one this week. Yes, have them trace it if possible, but don't escalate to the authorities yet. It's probably just another disgruntled former employee." As they passed Michael, neither gave him a second glance. He was simply part of the furniture, a non-entity in their world of high-stakes business and technology. But Michael had heard enough to piece together that Elizabeth Hudson was under pressure from her board, from competitors, and now apparently from someone sending threatening emails. Later that morning, as Michael cleaned the executive bathrooms, he overheard another conversation that caught his attention. Two men he didn't recognize were washing their hands, speaking in low tones. "Reed says it needs to happen tomorrow, before the Pentagon contract is signed." "What about the driver? Is he on board?" "Replaced him yesterday. Hudson won't notice the difference. And afterward, Vertex Systems will be the only viable contractor and will all be well compensated for our trouble." The men fell silent as another executive entered the bathroom. Michael kept his head down, methodically cleaning the countertops as if he hadn't heard a word. But his mind was racing, old instincts from his military days kicking in. Something wasn't right. When the rich think you're invisible, you see things they never meant to show. By mid-afternoon, Michael had worked his way down to the underground parking garage where the executives' cars were kept. As he collected trash from the receptacles near the elevator, he noticed a man in a chauffeur's uniform examining a sleek black Audi Elizabeth Hudson's car based on the reserved parking space it occupied. The man wasn't the regular driver Michael had seen in previous weeks. This driver was younger with close-cropped hair and a rigid posture that reminded Michael of military bearing. He was crouched by the driver's side door, apparently checking something beneath the vehicle. Michael deliberately dropped his trash bag, creating a noise that caused the man to straighten quickly. "Sorry about that," Michael said, adopting the easy, harmless demeanor he'd perfected during his time at Hudson. "Slipped right out of my hands." The chauffeur nodded curtly and moved away from the car, heading toward the driver's waiting area. As he walked past, Michael noticed something else, a barely perceptible bulge beneath the man's jacket right where a shoulder holster would sit. Michael's pulse quickened. In his former life, he would have reported this up the chain of command immediately. But here, who would listen to a janitor's concerns, he'd been at Hudson long enough to know that the rigid hierarchy wasn't just about organization, it was about who was worth listening to and who wasn't. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Elizabeth Hudson was in danger. The overheard conversation, the new driver, the concealed weapon, it all pointed to something ominous planned for tomorrow. As Michael finished his shift, he made a detour past the security desk in the main lobby. Frank Delgado, the head of building security, was reviewing footage on one of the monitors. "Hey, Frank," Michael said casually. "Notice they switched out Ms. Hudson's driver." Frank looked up, nodding. "Yeah, regular guy's got the flu or something. Company sent a replacement." "Didn't go through the usual security checks?" Michael pressed. Frank shrugged. "Came with all the proper credentials from the service. Why something off about him?" Michael hesitated. What could he say? That the man moved like military, that he was carrying a concealed weapon, that he'd overheard a vague conversation about something happening tomorrow. "Just doesn't seem as friendly as the regular guy," Michael said finally. "Probably nothing." Frank had already turned his attention back to the monitors. "Yeah, well, not everyone's the chatty type." Michael left the building, his mind troubled. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the plaza. He checked his watch. He had an hour before his second shift at the office building across town. Just enough time to make a quick stop. The public library was only a few blocks away. Michael found an empty computer station and began searching for information about Elizabeth Hudson and Hudson Technologies. The company was in the news regularly, a leader in secure communication systems, and currently in competition for a major Pentagon contract worth billions. Their main competitor was Vertex Systems, a company with a reputation for aggressive business tactics. More concerning were the articles about recent threats against tech executives. 2 CEOs in the region had received threatening packages in the past month. Another had reported break-ins at her home. The police had made no arrests, but there were theories that industrial espionage was behind the incidents. Michael searched for information about Elizabeth Hudson personally. Most articles focused on her meteoric rise in the tech industry, a Stanford graduate who had taken over the company founded by her father after his death 5 years ago. She was unmarried, lived alone in a penthouse downtown, and was known for her philanthropy almost as much as her business acumen. A photo caught Michael's eye, Elizabeth at a charity gala, elegant in an evening gown. But it wasn't the CEO who held his attention. It was the woman beside her, an older woman with similar features. The caption identified her as Catherine Hudson, sister of Elizabeth Hudson. Something about her face triggered a memory, but Michael couldn't place it. His phone alarm beeped, reminding him it was time to head to his second job. As he left the library, Michael knew he needed to make a decision. If his suspicions were correct, Elizabeth Hudson's life might be in danger. If he was wrong, he risked looking like a fool, or worse, losing his job for overstepping. There are 2 types of danger in this world: the danger you can see and the danger that comes from those you trust. That evening, after finishing his second shift, Michael picked up Abby from Mrs. Martinez's apartment. The elderly woman lived 2 doors down and had become something of a surrogate grandmother to Abby since they had moved to the building. She did her homework and ate all her dinner, Mrs. Martinez reported. "Such a good girl, your Abby." "Thanks for watching her," Michael said, handing Mrs. Martinez the $20 they'd agreed upon. It was money he could barely spare, but childcare was a necessity he couldn't avoid. "Any time," Mrs. Martinez said, pressing the money back into his hand. "You keep it this time. Save for her science camp." Michael wanted to refuse his pride, balked at charity, but he thought of Abby's face when she talked about the camp, how it was the first thing she'd shown real enthusiasm for since Sarah's death. "Thank you," he said, simply tucking the money away. "I won't forget this." Back in their apartment, as Michael tucked Abby into bed, she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Dad, do you ever wish you were still a soldier?" Michael sat on the edge of her bed, considering. "Sometimes I miss the purpose of it," he admitted, knowing exactly what my mission was, having a team I could count on. "But you didn't like fighting." "No sunshine. I didn't like fighting. I like protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." Abby was quiet for a moment, stroking the ear of her stuffed rabbit. "Is that why you helped Mrs. Martinez when those men tried to make her leave her apartment? Because you're still protecting people." Michael was surprised she knew about that. Last year, when the building had changed, owners, several tenants had been pressured to leave so the units could be renovated and rented at higher rates. Martinez, living on a fixed income, would have been forced out if Michael hadn't helped her navigate the tenant rights laws and stand up to the landlord's intimidation tactics. "I suppose so," he said. "When you see something wrong happening, you have a choice. You can look the other way, or you can do something about it. Even if it's scary, especially if it's scary." Michael smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling afraid and doing the right thing anyway." Abby nodded, her eyes growing heavy. "Like when you yelled at those boys who were making fun of Jesse at school." "You did that?" Michael asked, surprised. "Mm-hmm," Abby murmured, drifting toward sleep. "They were being mean about his stutter. I was scared, but I told them to stop. The teacher said I did the right thing." Pride swelled in Michael's chest. "You did sunshine. That was very brave." As Abby's breathing deepened into sleep, Michael remained by her bedside thinking. His daughter's simple moral clarity had crystallized something for him. If Elizabeth Hudson was indeed in danger, could he really look the other way, just because intervening might be complicated or risky? The decision felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders, even as a new tension took its place. Tomorrow he would find a way to warn Elizabeth Hudson. He didn't know if she would listen to a janitor, but he had to try it, Before turning in, Michael wrote a note to Abby, just in case things went wrong tomorrow. He told her how proud he was of her, how much he loved her, and that no matter what happened, she should always remember to be good, be smart, be kind, and be brave. He sealed the note in an envelope and tucked it into his dresser drawer, hoping he would never have to give it to her. Across town, in a luxurious penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, Elizabeth Hudson was still working. Spread across her dining table were reports, projections, and security assessments for the Pentagon contract presentations scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. This contract could secure Hudson Technologies' future for years to come. Her phone rang. Her brother Simon. Elizabeth sighed before answering. "It's nearly midnight, Simon. What is it?" "Just checking in on my favorite sister." Simon's voice was slightly slurred, suggesting he'd been drinking. "Big day tomorrow, right? The Pentagon thing." "Yes," Elizabeth said, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Which is why I'm still working and should probably get some sleep soon." "Need any help? I could come by look over the presentation." Elizabeth suppressed a bitter laugh. Simon, once a brilliant software developer, had fallen into a spiral of gambling and alcohol after their parents' death. His latest stint in rehab had lasted 3 months, but she wasn't confident it had taken. "I've got it covered," she said, "but thanks for the offer." "Come on, Lizzie, I want to contribute. Dad would have wanted me involved." "Dad would have wanted you sober and reliable," Elizabeth said, then immediately regretted her harshness. "I'm sorry, that wasn't fair." "No, you're right," Simon said, his voice smaller now. "But I am trying, Liz, I really am." "I know you are," Elizabeth softened. "Look, let's have dinner this weekend. We can talk about some projects you might help with, but right now I need to focus on tomorrow." After hanging up, Elizabeth stared at the reflection of herself in the darkened windows. At 36, she was at the helm of a company valued at billions, respected in an industry still dominated by men featured in business magazines as a pioneer and visionary. And yet most nights she returned to an empty apartment with only the ghosts of her parents for company. She picked up a framed photograph from her desk herself and her older sister Catherine at Catherine's military promotion ceremony 6 years ago. Catherine, so strong and assured in her uniform, had been Elizabeth's rock after their parents' death. But Catherine was gone now, two killed in action during a classified operation overseas. Elizabeth was truly alone. The only family she had left was Simon, and he was a shadow of the brother she'd once adored. She would keep trying to help him, of course. He was blood. But sometimes in her darkest moments, Elizabeth wondered if she was throwing good money after bad, enabling rather than helping. Her phone chimed with an email notification. Another anonymous message. Your father built his company on stolen ideas. Tomorrow justice comes due. Elizabeth forwarded it to her security team, adding it to the growing collection of threats she'd received in recent weeks. She wasn't overly concerned being a female CEO of a successful tech company made her a target for all kinds of harassment. Still, combined with the recent incidents involving other executives, it was unsettling. She turned back to her work, unaware that 20 miles away, in a small apartment with thin walls, a janitor was making plans that would change both their lives forever. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect spring day that gave no hint of the danger lurking beneath its surface. Michael had slept poorly, his mind replaying fragments of overheard conversations and images of the suspicious chauffeur. He'd formulated and discarded a dozen plans for warning Elizabeth Hudson, none of them perfect. He woke Abby early, explaining that he needed to get to work sooner than usual. Is everything okay, Dad? She asked, always perceptive. Everything's fine, sunshine, Michael assured her, helping her into her jacket. I just need to talk to someone before my shift starts. He dropped Abby at Mrs. Martinez's apartment with apologies for the early hour. The elderly woman waved away his concerns. Go, go. We'll have breakfast together, won't we, Abby? You can help me make cinnamon toast. As Michael rode the bus to Hudson Technologies, he rehearsed what he would say to Elizabeth Hudson. How did you tell someone they might be in danger without sounding like a lunatic, especially when that someone was a powerful CEO, and you were just the man who emptied her trash? The Hudson building was quieter than usual when Michael arrived the early hour, meaning only security and a few ambitious employees were present. He changed into his uniform quickly and then made his way to the executive floor, hoping to leave a note on Elizabeth's desk before her assistant arrived. But as he stepped off the elevator, Michael saw that the lights in Elizabeth's office were already on. Through the glass wall, he could see her at her desk, focused intently on her computer screen, a cup of coffee steaming beside her. She'd beaten him to the office. Michael hesitated, then straightened his shoulders and walked toward her office. A soldier never retreats from necessary action, no matter how intimidating the territory. He knocked lightly on the glass door. Elizabeth looked up, momentary confusion crossing her face at the sight of a janitor at her door this early. Yes, she called, her voice muffled through the glass. Michael opened the door slightly. Ms. Hudson, I'm sorry to disturb you, but could I speak with you for a moment? It's important. Elizabeth's expression remained professionally neutral, but Michael could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing the interruption against her busy schedule, trying to determine what a member of the cleaning staff could possibly need to discuss with her. I'm preparing for a very important meeting, she said. Can this wait? No, ma'am, Michael said firmly. I believe it concerns your safety. Something in his tone must have registered because Elizabeth's posture changed subtly, becoming more alert. She gestured for him to enter and close the door. What's your name? She asked as he approached her desk. Michael Kane. I work the day shift, mostly on the executive floors. And what concerns do you have about my safety, Mr. Kane? Michael took a deep breath. Yesterday, I overheard a conversation between two men in the executive bathroom. They were discussing something that needs to happen today before the Pentagon contract is signed. They mentioned your driver being replaced and that afterward, Vertex Systems would be the only viable contractor. Elizabeth's expression remained carefully controlled, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her pen tighter. I also saw a man examining your car in the garage, Michael continued. Not your regular driver. This one was carrying a concealed weapon. That's a serious accusation, Elizabeth said. Why come to me directly? Why not report this to security? I tried to raise concerns with the head of security, but Michael hesitated. I'm just a janitor, Ms. Hudson. People in my position aren't always taken seriously. Elizabeth studied him for a long moment. And why should I take you seriously, Mr. Kane? Because before I was a janitor, I was a staff sergeant with the Army Special Forces, Michael said quietly. I know what to look for when something isn't right, and something about your replacement driver in that conversation feels very wrong. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly at the mention of his military background. She leaned back in her chair, reassessing him. Special Forces, she repeated. My sister was military as well, a major in Army intelligence. Was, Michael asked, catching the past tense. A shadow crossed Elizabeth's face. She was killed in action 2 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss, Michael said sincerely. Elizabeth nodded, then seemed to make a decision. She reached for her phone. I'm going to call our head of security and have them investigate your concerns. If there's any truth to them, there might not be time for an investigation, Michael interrupted. If I'm right, and if they're planning something for today, it could happen as soon as you leave the building. Elizabeth's finger hovered over her phone. What exactly do you think they're planning? I don't know for certain, Michael admitted. But based on what I overheard and the fact that your driver was examining the underside of your car, I'm concerned they may have planted a device of some kind, possibly an explosive. There was a long moment of silence as Elizabeth processed this information. Then she set down her phone and fixed Michael with an intense gaze. Why do you care, Mr. Kane? Why put yourself at risk to warn me? The question caught Michael off guard. He'd been prepared for disbelief, dismissal, even anger, but not this penetrating inquiry into his motives. Last night, my daughter asked me if I missed being a soldier, he said finally. I told her that what I missed was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. When you see something wrong happening, you have a choice, look the other way or do something about it. A flicker of something recognition perhaps passed across Elizabeth's face. Before she could respond, her office phone rang. She glanced at the display. It's my assistant, she said, and the board members are arriving early for a pre-meeting before the Pentagon presentation. She answered the call, confirming she would join them shortly. After hanging up, she turned back to Michael. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Kane, but I have a company to run. I can't cancel a critical meeting based on an overheard conversation and a hunch. Michael felt a surge of frustration. Ms. Hudson, please. At least let security check your vehicle before you leave today. I'll consider it, she said, gathering her materials for the meeting. Now, if you'll excuse me. Michael had no choice but to leave her office, but as he pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway, his mind was racing. Elizabeth Hudson hadn't entirely dismissed his concerns, but she hadn't taken them seriously enough either. He couldn't force her to listen, but he also couldn't stand by if she was in danger. Sometimes the greatest dangers come not from what we can see, but from what we refuse to see. The morning passed in a blur for Michael. He went through the motions of his job, cleaning, emptying trash, restocking supplies, but his attention was focused on the executive floor monitoring the comings and goings. The board meeting stretched on for hours, breaking only briefly for lunch, which was catered in the conference room. Through discreet observation and snippets of conversation, Michael pieced together that the Pentagon representatives would be arriving at 2:00 p.m. for the contract presentation. Elizabeth would likely leave the building with them afterward for a dinner scheduled downtown. At 1:30 p.m., Michael made his way to the underground garage. He found a utility closet with a view of Elizabeth's parking space and waited, watching for any suspicious activity. His heart sank when he saw the same chauffeur from yesterday polishing Elizabeth's Audi, paying particular attention to the undercarriage. Michael knew he needed to act, but rushing in without a plan could make the situation worse. He considered his options. He could try to approach the car and inspect it himself, but that would alert the chauffeur. He could attempt to warn Elizabeth again, but she was in meetings with the Pentagon representatives now and would be unreachable. As he deliberated, Michael's phone vibrated with a text message from Mrs. Martinez. Abby not feeling well. Picked her up from school early. Fever. Asking for you. Michael's heart clenched. Abby rarely got sick, but when she did, her asthma sometimes flared up dangerously. He should be with her now, not staking out a parking garage on the slim chance his suspicions were correct. For a moment, Michael was torn between two responsibilities: the duty he felt toward warning Elizabeth Hudson and his paramount duty as a father. But it wasn't really a choice at all. Abby would always come first. He was about to leave when he saw Elizabeth and a group of men in military uniforms emerge from the elevator. They were heading toward her car, engaged in conversation, moving with the purposeful stride of people with important places to be. The chauffeur straightened, opening the rear door in anticipation of their arrival. Michael saw his hand slip inside his jacket briefly, possibly checking the weapon Michael had glimpsed yesterday. In that moment, every instinct in Michael's body screamed danger. Without conscious thought, he burst from the utility closet and ran toward the approaching group. "Miss Hudson, don't get in the car!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the concrete structure of the garage. Everyone froze. The Pentagon officials looked alarmed. Elizabeth's expression shifted from shock to recognition as she saw Michael. The chauffeur's hand moved inside his jacket. "There's something under the car." Michael continued, slowing his approach with his hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. "Please just stay back." Security guards were rushing toward them now, hands on their weapons. The chauffeur was backing away from the car, pulling something from his pocket. Not a gun, but what looked like a remote control. And then in the deadly silence that followed Michael's warning, came a small metallic click from beneath the vehicle. A sound too subtle for most to notice, but unmistakable to someone with Michael's training. The sound of a detonator being armed. A father's love, a soldier's instinct, and a split-second decision. Sometimes 3 seconds of courage can change an entire life or save one. Time seemed to stand still in the underground garage of Hudson Technologies. The metallic click from beneath Elizabeth Hudson's vehicle hung in the air like a death sentence. Security guards surrounded the group, their weapons drawn, but uncertain where to point them. The Pentagon officials backed away instinctively, years of training kicking in at the first sign of danger. Michael's mind raced through the possibilities. If this was what he suspected, a remote-controlled explosive device, they had seconds, not minutes. The chauffeur was still holding what appeared to be a detonator, his expression shifting from confidence to panic as he realized his plan was unraveling. "Everyone back now!" Michael shouted, authority returning to his voice as if he were still commanding troops. "That's a detonator." The security guards finally noticed what the chauffeur was holding. 2 of them lunged toward him, while others began evacuating the Pentagon officials and Elizabeth toward the stairwell. In the confusion, the chauffeur pressed the button on the device. Michael's heart stopped, but instead of an explosion, there was only another small click from beneath the car. The detonator had malfunctioned, or perhaps there was a delay mechanism. "Bomb!" Michael yelled the word, echoing through the garage. "Clear the area." The garage erupted into controlled chaos. Alarms blared as the building's emergency protocols activated. Security was now fully engaged, tackling the chauffeur to the ground, while others established a perimeter around the suspect vehicle. Michael found himself being pushed toward the stairwell, along with Elizabeth and the officials. As they reached the door, he felt his phone vibrate again. Another message from Mrs. Martinez about Abby. The conflict tore at him. His daughter needed him, but he couldn't leave until he was certain Elizabeth was safe. "Mr. Kane," Elizabeth's voice cut through his thoughts. She was standing near him, remarkably composed despite the situation. "Thank you. You may have saved all our lives." Before Michael could respond, the head of security approached. "Miss Hudson, we need to evacuate you immediately. The bomb squad is on their way, but we can't take any chances." Elizabeth nodded, then turned back to Michael. "Come with us. I want to hear exactly what you saw and heard." "I can't," Michael said, showing her the text from Mrs. Martinez. "My daughter is sick. I need to get to her." Something shifted in Elizabeth's expression, recognition perhaps of a fellow human being with priorities beyond the immediate crisis. "Of course," she said, "go to your daughter, but please come to my office tomorrow morning. We have much to discuss." Michael hesitated only briefly before nodding and hurrying toward the exit. As he left the building, police cars and a bomb disposal unit were already arriving, their lights painting the street in flashes of red and blue. Sometimes the greatest battles we face aren't the ones we choose, but the ones that choose us when we're least prepared. Michael arrived at Mrs. Martinez's apartment to find Abby on the couch, a cool cloth on her forehead. Her breathing was labored, but not dangerously so, not yet the full-blown asthma attack he had feared. "Daddy," she said weakly as he knelt beside her, her small hand reaching for his. "I'm here, sunshine," he assured her, checking her temperature with the back of his hand. She was warm but not burning up. "How are you feeling?" "My chest hurts when I breathe deep," Abby said. Mrs. Martinez hovered nearby. "I gave her the inhaler when she started wheezing. She's better now, but I thought you should know." "You did exactly right," Michael told her gratefully. "Thank you for taking care of her." He turned his attention back to Abby, helping her sit up to take a sip of water. Let's get you home, okay? You can rest better in your own bed." As Michael carried Abby back to their apartment, he couldn't help but think about what had just happened at Hudson Technologies. Had he truly prevented an assassination attempt? Would Elizabeth Hudson have dismissed his warning if he hadn't been so insistent? And what would happen now? The question swirled in his mind as he settled Abby into bed, gave her the prescribed dose of medication, and set up the humidifier to ease her breathing. "Dad," Abby's voice was small in the quiet room. "Did something happen at work today? You look worried." Michael smiled, trying to mask his concern. "Just a busy day. Nothing for you to worry about." "You're not very good at lying," Abby said with unexpected perception. "Mom always said your eyes get all squinty when you don't tell the truth." The observation caught Michael off guard, not just the accuracy but the casual mention of Sarah. Abby rarely spoke of her mother unprompted. "You're right," he admitted, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Something did happen at work. I noticed something dangerous and I had to warn people about it." "Did you help them, like you helped Mrs. Martinez?" "I think so," Michael said. "I hope so." Abby nodded, satisfied with his answer. "That's good. Mom would be proud." The simple statement struck Michael to his core. Would Sarah be proud of the life they were living now? Of him struggling to make ends meet with two menial jobs, of raising their daughter in a tiny apartment in a neighborhood that grew more dangerous by the year. He pushed the thoughts aside. "How about I read you a story until you fall asleep?" Later that evening, after Abby had drifted off, Michael turned on the small television in the living room, keeping the volume low. He flipped through channels until he found a local news broadcast. "Breaking news tonight. An alleged assassination attempt at Hudson Technologies has resulted in 2 arrests," the anchor announced. According to police, a remotely detonated explosive device was found attached to the vehicle of CEO Elizabeth Hudson. The device was safely disarmed by the bomb squad. While police have not released the names of those arrested, sources close to the investigation suggest they may have ties to a competing technology firm. The report continued but offered few details Michael didn't already know. There was no mention of his role in the incident, which was fine by him. The last thing he needed was publicity. His phone rang, an unknown number. Michael hesitated before answering. "Mr. Kane, this is James Cooper, CFO at Hudson Technologies," a voice said. "Miss Hudson asked me to check on you and your daughter. Is she all right?" Michael was surprised by the call. "She's doing better, thank you. Just a mild asthma flare-up." "Good to hear," Cooper replied. "Ms. Hudson wants me to assure you that your job is secure, regardless of how much time you need to care for your daughter. She also asked me to inform you that the board has approved a special compensation package in recognition of your actions today." "That's not necessary," Michael started to say, but Cooper cut him off. "It's already been processed. You'll find the first installment in your account by morning. Ms. Hudson is also expecting you in her office tomorrow at 9 a.m. if your daughter's condition allows." After hanging up, Michael checked his bank account on his phone. His eyes widened at the notification of a pending deposit, more money than he earned in 3 months. The gesture was generous, but it left Michael uneasy. He didn't want to be bought off or silenced. He had acted out of duty and moral obligation, not for reward. Still, he couldn't deny that the money would help with Abby's medical bills and maybe even the science camp she wanted to attend. When faced with unexpected kindness, our first instinct is often suspicion, a sad reflection of how rarely true generosity comes without strings attached. The next morning, Abby's fever had broken and her breathing was normal again. Mrs. Martinez agreed to look in on her throughout the day, assuring Michael she would call immediately if Abby's condition changed. As Michael approached Hudson Technologies, he noticed increased security at the entrance. Guards checked IDs more carefully, and a police car was stationed outside. The events of yesterday had clearly put the company on high alert. To his surprise, Michael was expected. The security guard at the desk called upstairs as soon as he gave his name, and he was issued a visitor's badge rather than his usual janitorial ID. "Ms. Hudson's office, 45th floor," the guard instructed. "You're to go directly up." The executive elevator, normally off-limits to maintenance staff, whisked Michael to the top floor. He felt out of place in his worn jeans and faded button-down shirt, the nicest clothes he owned, but a far cry from the tailored suits that populated these halls. Elizabeth's assistant, a poised young woman with sharp eyes, greeted him. Mr. Kane, Ms. Hudson is expecting you. Please go right in. Elizabeth's office was larger than Michael's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Elizabeth herself stood looking out at the skyline, her back to the door. She turned as Michael entered, and he was struck by how different she appeared from yesterday. Gone was the corporate armor of her tailored suit, replaced by a more casual outfit, still elegant but less formal. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without her usual makeup, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Mr. Kane," she said, gesturing to a seating area near the windows, "please join me." As Michael sat in one of the plush chairs, Elizabeth took the seat across from him rather than retreating behind her imposing desk. "How is your daughter?" she asked, surprising him with what seemed like genuine concern. "Better, thank you," Michael replied. "It was just a mild asthma flare-up." Elizabeth nodded. "I'm glad to hear it. Abby correct, she's 9. Michael's guard went up slightly. "How do you know that?" "I had our HR department pull your file after yesterday's events," Elizabeth admitted. "I wanted to know more about the man who potentially saved my life." "About that," Michael said, shifting uncomfortably. "The money that was deposited in my account, it wasn't necessary." "Consider it hazard pay," Elizabeth said with a small smile, "or a bonus for exceptional service beyond your job description. Either way, it's non-negotiable." Before Michael could protest further, Elizabeth continued. "The police have confirmed what you suspected. There was indeed an explosive device attached to my car, sophisticated enough that it would have been undetectable in a routine security check. The 2 men arrested have connections to Vertex Systems, though the company is of course denying any involvement. And the chauffeur, former military, dishonorable discharge. He's not talking yet, but they found significant cash deposits in his account over the past month." Elizabeth leaned forward slightly. "What I want to know, Mr. Kane, is how you knew. What made you suspicious enough to risk your mao and potentially your reputation to warn me?" Michael considered his response carefully. "It was a combination of things. The overheard conversation, the new driver, the way he was examining your vehicle. But mostly it was instinct. In the military, you develop a sense for when something isn't right." "Special forces, you said," Elizabeth remarked. "My sister Catherine was in Army intelligence. She often worked with SF teams on operations." At the mention of Catherine's name, something clicked in Michael's mind. The photograph he'd seen, the vague sense of recognition. "Your sister," he said slowly. "What was her full name?" "Major Catherine Hudson," Elizabeth had replied. "She was killed in action 2 years ago. The details are still classified." Michael felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. "Operation Nightshade," he said quietly. "Kandahar province." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I was there," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Major Hudson extracted my team when our mission went sideways. She saved 4 of us, but she and 2 of my men didn't make it out." The revelation hung in the air between them, a connection neither had anticipated. "You knew Catherine," Elizabeth said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "You actually knew her." "She was brave," Michael said. "Smart. Kept her cool when everything went to hell. She's the reason I made it home to my daughter." Elizabeth turned away, briefly composing herself. When she faced Michael again, her eyes were damp, but her voice was steady. "And now you've saved me," she said. "Some might call that fate." "Or just a really strange coincidence," Michael offered. Elizabeth smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Kane. Not of this magnitude. Sometimes the people we're destined to meet enter our lives disguised as strangers carrying pieces of our past we never expected to find." Elizabeth walked to her desk and returned with a folder, which she placed on the coffee table between them. "I have a proposition for you," she said. "Hudson Technologies is reevaluating our security protocols after yesterday's incident. We need someone with your background and instincts. I'd like to offer you a position on our executive security team." Michael stared at the folder but didn't open it. "I'm a janitor," he said flatly. "You're a decorated Special Forces veteran with extensive training in threat assessment and protection," Elizabeth corrected him, "who happens to be working as a janitor at the moment. I don't have the credentials for corporate security, no formal training." You have experience and instinct, which proved more valuable than our entire security apparatus yesterday. Elizabeth pushed the folder toward him. The position comes with a significant salary increase, comprehensive benefits, including health insurance that would cover your daughter's medical needs, and a schedule that would allow you to be home evenings with her. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. It was exactly what Michael and Abby needed, but something held him back. Why me? He asked. You have access to professionally trained security personnel, former Secret Service, FBI, private firms. Because none of them noticed what you noticed, Elizabeth said simply. And because you had no obligation to warn me, every reason to keep your head down, but you didn't. That kind of integrity can't be taught or bought. She paused, then added more quietly, and because you knew Catherine, you're a connection to a part of her life I never got to share. Michael finally opened the folder. The salary figure made his breath catch. It was more than 5 times what he currently earned. The benefits package was equally generous, including tuition assistance that would cover Abby's education through college. I need time to think about it, he said. Of course, Elizabeth agreed. Talk the weekend. The position will be available whenever you're ready. As Michael left Elizabeth's office, his mind was swirling with possibilities. The job offer represented a future he had stopped allowing himself to imagine: financial security, a better neighborhood, opportunities for Abby. But it also meant changes, uncertainty, stepping back into a world adjacent to the one he'd left behind when he'd hung up his uniform. What Michael couldn't know, was that the events set in motion by his warning were far from over. The attempt on Elizabeth's life had failed, but the forces behind it were not so easily deterred. And his connection to Elizabeth Hudson had just made him a person of interest to people who operated in shadows far darker than he realized. That evening, as Michael helped Abby with her science homework, his phone rang again. Mrs. Martinez. Michael, she said, her voice tight with worry. There was a man asking questions about you in the building today. He said he was from the insurance company, but I've never seen an insurance agent with a gun under his jacket. Michael's blood ran cold. What did you tell him? Nothing, I'm not stupid, Mrs. Martinez said indignantly. But he was talking to other neighbors too. I thought you should know. After hanging up, Michael checked that the apartment door was locked and moved Abby's homework to the kitchen table away from the windows. He kept his voice casual, not wanting to frighten her. Sunshine, remember how we sometimes practice our just-in-case plan? He asked, referring to the emergency procedures he'd taught her. Let's go over it again. Abby looked up from her science worksheet. Is something wrong, Dad? No, just being careful, Michael assured her. What do you do if I tell you it's time for ice cream? Get my go bag from under my bed, go out the fire escape, and wait at Ms. Chen's store, Abby recited dutifully. But only if you say ice cream. That's right, Michael said, ruffling her hair. You're so smart. As Abby returned to her homework, Michael's mind raced. The insurance agent with a concealed weapon couldn't be a coincidence, not after yesterday's events. Someone was looking for him, perhaps the same people who had planned the attack on Elizabeth. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Car outside in 10 minutes. Come alone. E.H. Elizabeth Hudson. How had she gotten his personal number? And why the cloak and dagger approach? Michael's instincts screamed caution, but if Elizabeth was also in danger. He called Mrs. Martinez again, asking if she could come stay with Abby for a little while. The elderly woman agreed without hesitation, arriving 5 minutes later. Just a quick errand, Michael explained both to Mrs. Martinez and to Abby. I'll be back soon. Be careful, Mrs. Martinez said, her eyes communicating that she understood more than she was saying. That man might still be around. Michael nodded, gave Abby a quick kiss on the forehead, and headed downstairs. A sleek black car with tinted windows idled at the curb. As he approached, the rear door opened. Elizabeth Hudson sat inside, dressed in dark clothing, her hair hidden under a cap. Get in, she said urgently. We don't have much time. The greatest dangers often come not from strangers, but from those closest to the people we trust. Michael hesitated only briefly before sliding into the car beside Elizabeth. The door closed behind him, and the vehicle pulled smoothly away from the curb. What's going on? He demanded. Why all the secrecy? Because we can't trust the normal channels of communication, Elizabeth said, her voice low. The attack yesterday wasn't just about me, or even about the Pentagon contract. It's much bigger than that. She handed Michael a tablet showing security camera footage from the Hudson Technologies parking garage. The timestamp indicated it was from early that morning. "This is James Cooper, my CFO," Elizabeth said, pointing to a familiar figure in the video. "The man he's meeting with. That's Alexander Reed, the CEO of Vertex Systems." Michael watched as the two men engaged in an intense conversation, Cooper handing Reed what appeared to be a thumb drive. "Cooper's been feeding information to Vertex for months," Elizabeth continued. "The attack on me was meant to look like industrial espionage gone wrong, but the real goal was to delay the Pentagon contract long enough for Vertex to steal our proprietary technology." "How did you discover this?" Michael asked, studying the footage. "After yesterday, I ordered a comprehensive security review, including camera footage from the past month. This meeting happened at 5:30 this morning when Cooper thought no one would be monitoring the feeds." Michael processed this information. "So why come to me? This is a matter for the FBI corporate espionage." "Because I don't know who else I can trust," Elizabeth interrupted. "The conspirators might include other executives, board members, even security personnel. And because of this," she handed him another tablet, this one displaying what appeared to be a personnel file, his own from his military days. Many sections were redacted, but what remained painted a picture of his special forces career, including his final mission in Kandahar. "How did you get this?" Michael asked, his voice hardening. "These records should have been classified." "Catherine had a copy," Elizabeth said quietly. "After she died, I received a package of her personal effects. This was among them, along with a letter explaining that if anything ever happened to her, I should find the men from Operation Nightshade, that they could be trusted." "There were only 4 of us who made it out," Michael said. "Me, Davis, Rodriguez, and Wilson." "I've been looking for all of you," Elizabeth admitted. "When your name appeared in our employee database 6 months ago, I thought it might be you, but I wasn't certain until yesterday." Michael's mind was reeling. "Are you saying you knew who I was all this time?" "I suspected," Elizabeth corrected, "but I couldn't approach you without confirmation." Catherine's letter was very specific about being careful. The car turned onto a quiet street lined with warehouses. Michael tensed, his training kicking in. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk freely," Elizabeth said. "A property owned by a shell company Catherine established. No connection to Hudson Technologies or me personally." As the car stopped outside a nondescript building, Michael's phone buzzed again. Another text from Mrs. Martinez. "The man came back, asked specifically about you and Ms. Hudson. I told him nothing, but he seemed to know you left together." A chill ran down Michael's spine. "We need to leave," he said, showing Elizabeth the message. "Now, they know we're together." Elizabeth's eyes widened in alarm. "How could they?" She stopped as the realization hit her. "Cooper. He must have seen us on the security feeds and realized I know about his betrayal." The driver turned to look at them through the partition. "Miss Hudson, there's a vehicle approaching from behind. It's moving fast." Michael glanced out the rear window to see headlights bearing down on them. "Rive-or-shao," he shouted. "Now." The driver accelerated just as the pursuing vehicle rammed into their rear bumper. The impact threw Michael and Elizabeth forward, then back against their seats. "Head for the highway," Michael instructed the driver. "More witnesses, harder for them to make a move." As their car sped through the warehouse district, Michael's thoughts turned to Abby. If these people knew about his connection to Elizabeth, they might also use Abby to get to him. He needed to make sure she was safe. "I need to call my neighbor," he said urgently. "My daughter might be in danger." Elizabeth handed him a different phone than the one he'd been using. "Use this. It's secure and untraceable." Michael dialed Mrs. Martinez, his heart pounding. "Mrs. Martinez, it's Michael. You need to take Abby and go to Mrs. Chen's store now. Use the fire escape. Tell her it's time for ice cream." "Michael, what's happening?" Mrs. Martinez asked, her voice trembling. "I can't explain now. Just please get Abby to safety. I'll contact you soon." After hanging up, Michael turned to Elizabeth. "We need to get somewhere secure and figure out who's behind this. It's bigger than Cooper and Reed." Elizabeth nodded, her face pale but determined. "I think I know who might be pulling the strings. My brother Simon." "Your brother?" Michael was taken aback. "Why would he want to harm you?" "Money, power, revenge," Elizabeth said bitterly. "Simon resented that our father left me in charge of the company instead of him. He's been struggling with gambling debts and addiction for years. I've tried to help him, but he sees it as charity, not support. The pursuing vehicle was still behind them, gaining ground despite their driver's evasive maneuvers. We can't outrun them, Michael assessed. We need to change vehicles, get off the grid. Just as he said this, their car swerved violently, a blown tire. The driver fought for control, but couldn't prevent the vehicle from spinning and crashing into a concrete barrier. The impact deployed the airbags, momentarily stunning Michael. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Elizabeth groan beside him. The driver wasn't moving. "Elizabeth," Michael said urgently, reaching for her. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she gasped, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead. "Just shaken." Michael looked out the window to see the pursuing vehicle had stopped. Two men were approaching, weapons drawn. "We need to move," he said, unbuckling Elizabeth's seatbelt and then his own. "Can you run?" She nodded, gathering herself. "There's an emergency exit on your side." Michael glanced at the driver, confirming what he already feared: the man hadn't survived the crash. Another death on his conscience, another life lost because of his involvement. No time for guilt now. Survival first. "Stay low and follow me," he instructed Elizabeth, forcing open his door against the crumpled frame of the car. They emerged into the cool night air, the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. Someone had reported the crash, which meant police would arrive soon, but not soon enough. "This way," Elizabeth said, pulling Michael toward a narrow alley between warehouses. As they ran, a shot rang out behind them, the bullet ricocheting off brick inches from Michael's head. He pushed Elizabeth ahead of him, shielding her with his body as they zigzagged through the industrial maze. The true measure of courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important than that fear. The industrial district was a labyrinth of shadows and blind corners. Michael and Elizabeth ran through narrow alleys between warehouses, the sound of their pursuers never far behind. Years of military training had prepared Michael for situations like this, but Elizabeth was struggling to keep pace, her breathing becoming more labored with each passing minute. "We need to find cover," Michael whispered, pulling Elizabeth behind a dumpster as footsteps approached. "Catch your breath." In the dim glow of distant streetlights, he could see the determination in Elizabeth's eyes despite the fear. The cut on her forehead had stopped bleeding, but left a dark streak across her pale skin. "Who are these people?" she asked between breaths. "Professional," Michael replied grimly. "Military or ex-military, from the way they move, not just corporate security." They fell silent as their pursuers passed nearby, the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the alley entrance. When the light disappeared, Michael checked his borrowed phone. No signal, either damaged in the crash or being jammed. "We can't stay here," he said. "We need to get to Abby and make sure she's safe." Elizabeth nodded. "There's a safe house Catherine set up, about 2 miles from here. If we can get there, we'll have resources: cash, weapons, clean phones." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Your sister had a safe house." "Catherine was cautious," Elizabeth said. "She believed in contingency plans." "Smart woman," Michael muttered, peering around the edge of the dumpster. "Okay, let's move. Stay close, step where I step, and if I tell you to run, don't argue." They continued through the maze of buildings, avoiding main streets and keeping to the shadows. Michael led them in a circuitous route, doubling back occasionally to ensure they weren't being followed. The distant wail of sirens suggested police were at the crash site, but that wouldn't deter professional hunters for long. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, they reached a nondescript apartment building in a working-class neighborhood. Elizabeth led them to a rear entrance, punching a code into a keypad. "Second floor, apartment 2C, she whispered. The apartment was sparsely furnished but well-equipped. Michael immediately checked the perimeter, while Elizabeth locked the door and drew the blinds. "Clear," he announced, returning to the main room. "Now tell me everything. Who would your brother work with to try to kill you?" Elizabeth sank onto a worn sofa, the adrenaline crash evident in her slumped shoulders. "Simon has always been brilliant but unstable. After our parents died, he spiraled into addiction and gambling. He resented that our father left me in control of Hudson Technologies." "But attempted murder is a big leap from resentment," Michael pointed out. "Simon owes dangerous people a lot of money," Elizabeth continued. "And Vertex Systems has been trying to acquire our technology for years. It's possible they approached him, offered to clear his debts in exchange for corporate secrets. And when that wasn't enough, they decided to remove you from the equation entirely," Michael concluded. With you gone, who controls the company? Elizabeth's expression darkened. The board initially, but Simon is the only remaining Hudson. They'd likely install him as CEO, especially if he appeared to have gotten his act together. Michael located a first aid kit in the bathroom and returned to clean Elizabeth's wound properly. As he worked, she winced but didn't complain. "We need to contact the authorities," Michael said. "This is beyond corporate espionage now. And tells them what that my brother is trying to kill me." Elizabeth shook her head. "Without proof, it's my word against his. And Simon is very good at appearing charming and reasonable when he needs to." Michael's thoughts turned to Abby. He needed to check if she was safe, but using an unsecured line could put her in more danger. "Catherine's safe house," he said slowly. "Would it have secure communication equipment?" Elizabeth nodded, pointing to a locked cabinet near the window. "The key is behind the refrigerator." Michael retrieved the key and opened the cabinet to find an impressive array of communications gear, weapons, and surveillance equipment. Catherine Hudson had indeed been thorough in her preparations. "Your sister was either incredibly paranoid or incredibly prescient," Michael remarked. "Both probably," Elizabeth said with a sad smile. "Growing up, she always saw dangers the rest of us missed. I used to think she was just overprotective. Now I wonder if she knew something about Hudson Technologies that made her wary." Using the secure equipment, Michael established a connection to a number Mrs. Martinez had for emergencies only. After several tense rings, she answered. "Michael, is that you?" "Yes, it's me. Are you and Abby safe?" "We're at Ms. Chen's apartment above the store," Mrs. Martinez confirmed. "Your daughter is sleeping now. She was scared, but she followed your instructions perfectly." "Who were those men, Michael?" "I can't explain right now," Michael said, "but I need you to stay there until I contact you again. Don't use your phone, don't go back to the apartment, and don't tell anyone where you are." "The police came," Mrs. Martinez informed him. "They asked many questions about you and Ms. Hudson. They said there was an accident." Michael exchanged a glance with Elizabeth. "What did you tell them?" "Only that you left with a woman in a car. I didn't know where you were going." "Good. Stay safe and give Abby a hug for me. Tell her I'm keeping a promise to her mother." After ending the call, Michael turned to find Elizabeth examining the weapons cabinet. She held a handgun with surprising familiarity. "Catherine taught me to shoot," she explained, seeing his expression. "She insisted everyone in the family should know how to defend themselves." "Your sister sounds like she would have been a good friend to have in a crisis," Michael said. Elizabeth's eyes grew distant. "She was. I miss her every day." She cleared her throat, focusing again. "So what's our next move?" Michael considered their options. "We need evidence linking Simon Cooper and Reed to the assassination attempt. Something concrete enough that the authorities can't ignore it. Cooper's office would have records of his communications with Vertex," Elizabeth suggested. "And I know where Simon keeps his private files. He has an apartment downtown that he thinks I don't know about." "Going back to Hudson Technologies is too risky," Michael said. "They'll be watching the building. But if we could access the company servers remotely..." Elizabeth's eyes lit up. "We can. I have emergency access protocols that bypass normal security. If Cooper has been communicating with Vertex or Simon from his work accounts, we can find it." She moved to a laptop stored in the cabinet and powered it up. After navigating through several layers of security, she accessed the Hudson Technologies internal network. "I'm in," she announced, "but this will take time. Cooper is tech-savvy enough to cover his tracks." Michael used the opportunity to check the apartment's security again and to take inventory of their resources. The safe house was well stocked with non-perishable food, water, medical supplies, and ammunition. Catherine Hudson had prepared for a long siege if necessary. As he explored, Michael found a photo album tucked away in a drawer. Inside were pictures of Elizabeth and Catherine from childhood to adulthood, vacations, graduations, family gatherings. Simon appeared in many of the earlier photos, a lanky teenager with a mischievous smile that never quite reached his eyes. The final pages contained military photos of Catherine with her unit, including several that showed her with Special Forces teams. And there in the last photo was Michael's own team, from Operation Nightshade himself, Davis, Rodriguez, and Wilson, along with Catherine and her intelligence officers. The photo had been taken just days before the mission that claimed Catherine's life and ended Michael's military career. Michael stared at the image, memories flooding back. The mission had been compromised somehow, enemy forces waiting in what should have been a secure extraction zone. He'd always suspected a leak, but could never prove it. "Elizabeth," he called, his voice tight, "I think there's something you need to see. When we discover a betrayal, the most painful part isn't the act itself, but realizing how long we've been blind to the truth." Elizabeth joined him, looking over his shoulder at the photograph. "That's you," she said softly, pointing to the younger version of Michael. "And Catherine. This was taken before our final mission together," Michael explained. "The operation was classified a high-value extraction in Kandahar province. Only a handful of people knew the details, including the extraction point. But the enemy was waiting for us. 4 of my men died in the ambush, along with Catherine and one of her officers." Elizabeth's breath caught. "You think it was compromised intentionally? By whom?" "I never knew," Michael admitted. "The investigation concluded it was a tragic intelligence failure. But now you're wondering if there's a connection to what's happening." Elizabeth finished his thought. "Operation Nightshade involved extracting a scientist who had information about advanced weapon systems technology similar to what Hudson is developing for the Pentagon contract." Michael said slowly, the pieces falling into place. "What if someone at Hudson was involved back then? What if the same person who betrayed our mission is behind the attempt on your life?" Elizabeth returned to the laptop, typing rapidly. "I'm going to check personnel records. See if anyone currently at Hudson had connections to military contracts during that period." While she worked, Michael continued examining the album. A business card fell from between the pages. "Alexander Reed, CEO of Vertex Systems." On the bow, written in what Michael assumed was Catherine's handwriting, "Cannot be trusted." Watching him. "Elizabeth," Michael said urgently, "did Catherine ever mention Alexander Reed to you?" Elizabeth looked up from the computer. "Reed, no, why?" Michael showed her the card. "She was investigating him, or at least suspicious of him." Elizabeth took the card, turning it over in her hands. "Reed worked for the Department of Defense before founding Vertex. He would have had clearance to know about classified operations, and motive to sabotage them if the technology being developed threatened his interests," Michael added. A chime from the laptop interrupted them. Elizabeth returned to the screen, her expression changing from concentration to shock. "I found something," she said. "Emails between Cooper and Reed dating back 3 years. They're coded, but it's clear they've been working together for a long time. And there's this." She turned the screen to show Michael a financial record. A payment of $2 million from a shell company owned by Vertex to an offshore account linked to Simon. The date is 1 week before the assassination attempt. "That's the evidence we need," Michael said. "We should contact the FBI." Elizabeth hesitated. "There's more. I found references to Operation Nightshade in Cooper's archived files. He had access to the mission details, Michael. He was the liaison between Hudson Technologies and the Department of Defense at the time." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. Cooper had known about the extraction point. He could have leaked the information, causing the ambush that killed Catherine and Michael's men. "Why, whoa?" Michael asked, more to himself than Elizabeth. "What would he gain from sabotaging that mission?" "The scientist you were extracting," Elizabeth said carefully. "What was his specialty?" "Quantum encryption," Michael replied. "He had developed a breakthrough that would make communications virtually unhackable." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "That's the core of our Pentagon contract. The technology we're offering is built on quantum encryption principles. So Cooper betrayed our mission to prevent that technology from reaching American hands," Michael theorized. "And now, years later, when Hudson is about to deliver a perfected version to the Pentagon, he tries again, this time by eliminating me and putting Simon in control." Elizabeth finished. "With my brother as a puppet CEO, Vertex could acquire our technology or ensure it never reaches the military." Their grim conversation was interrupted by a notification on the secure phone, a text message from an unknown number. "We have the girl. Exchange her for Hudson. Warehouse 17, Pier District, midnight." Michael's blood ran cold. "Abby," he whispered immediately, trying to call Mrs. Martinez. No answer. "They found her," he said, voice hoarse with fear. "They have my daughter." Elizabeth placed a hand on his arm, her grip firm and reassuring. We'll get her back, Michael, I promise you. How? Michael demanded, desperation edging into his voice. They want to exchange her for you. It's a trap, obviously, but if Abby's in danger, then we spring the trap on our terms, Elizabeth said with sudden determination. Cooper doesn't know about this safe house or the resources Catherine left. We have weapons, we have evidence of their conspiracy, and most importantly, they don't expect us to fight back effectively. Michael took a deep breath, forcing himself to think tactically rather than emotionally. Warehouse 17 is large, with multiple entry points. If I can get in undetected before the meeting— Not alone, Elizabeth interrupted. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not, Michael objected. You're their primary target. Exactly, Elizabeth said, which makes me the perfect distraction. You find Abby while they're focused on me. Michael wanted to argue, but the determined set of Elizabeth's jaw told him it would be futile. Besides, she was right. A two-pronged approach offered the best chance of success. Fine, he conceded, but we do this my way. And you follow my instructions exactly. Elizabeth nodded. Agreed. What's the plan? Michael moved to the weapons cabinet, selecting equipment with practiced efficiency. First, we need to ensure the evidence against Cooper Reed and Simon is secure. Upload everything to multiple secure locations. While Elizabeth handled the data, Michael prepared their gear weapons, communication devices, basic medical supplies. His mind was racing, analyzing angles of approach, potential threats, extraction routes. Michael, Elizabeth said softly, interrupting his preparations, I know you're worried about Abby, but you should know something about Catherine. She once told me that if anything ever happened to her, she'd want her legacy to be the lives she saved, not the ones she took. I think she'd be proud that you're still saving lives. Michael paused, the weight of the past and present heavy on his shoulders. I couldn't save her, he said quietly. But you saved her team members, Elizabeth reminded him. And now you have a chance to save Abby and stop the people responsible for Catherine's death. That matters. Their eyes met in silent understanding. They were no longer CEO and janitor, but allies united by lost duty and the determination to protect those they loved. As they geared up for the confrontation ahead, Michael's phone chimed with another message. Insurance policy activated, tick-tock. Attached was a photo of Abby, frightened but unharmed, holding a newspaper with today's date. Beside her was an object that made Michael's blood freeze, a device with a digital timer counting down. They've rigged explosives, he said, showing Elizabeth the image. We have less than 3 hours. Elizabeth studied the photo, her expression hardening. That's not just any explosive. That's a prototype from Hudson's Military Research Division. It shouldn't exist outside our secure labs. Cooper again, Michael surmised. He's been funneling more than just information to Vertex. This changes things, Elizabeth said. That device has a specialized detonator. Standard disarming techniques won't work. Can you disable it? Michael asked. I designed the fail-safes, Elizabeth confirmed, but I need to be there in person. It requires biometric authentication, my fingerprint and retinal scan. The stakes had just risen exponentially. Not only did they need to rescue Abby, but Elizabeth had to be part of the rescue, placing herself directly in danger. We need backup, Michael decided. Someone we can trust, absolutely. Elizabeth thought for a moment, then nodded. There is someone. My head of research, Dr. Naomi Chen. She designed the hardware for the Pentagon project and has been suspicious of Cooper for months. She has no connection to Vertex or Simon. Can she help us disarm the device? Michael asked. Better, Elizabeth said. She can remotely access the prototype systems and slow the countdown, giving us more time. But we need to get her a secure connection to the device's frequency. Michael checked his watch. 2 hours and 45 minutes until the deadline. Make the call. While Elizabeth contacted Dr. Chen, Michael studied satellite images of the warehouse district, planning their approach. The fear for Abby was a physical ache in his chest, but he forced it down, channeling it into focus. Emotion would not save his daughter, preparation and execution would. Chen is on board, Elizabeth reported. She'll be ready to interface with the device as soon as we establish visual confirmation. Michael nodded, finishing his tactical assessment. We'll approach from the water side, less surveillance, more cover. I'll enter first, locate Abby, and assess the situation. You follow with the disarming equipment. We maintain communication at all times. And if something goes wrong, Elizabeth asked quietly, then I get Abby out at any cost, Michael said firmly. And you run. The evidence you've gathered is enough to bring down Cooper, Reed, and Simon, but only if you're alive to present it. Elizabeth started to protest, but Michael cut her off. That's non-negotiable. Abby is 9 years old. She's already lost her mother. I won't let her become an orphan. After a moment, Elizabeth nodded. Understood. But Michael, I won't abandon either of you easily. The sentiment surprised him. This woman who had barely known him days ago was now willing to risk her life for him and his daughter. Perhaps Catherine's influence ran deeper than he'd realized. They gathered their equipment and headed out using a service exit to avoid detection. The night had grown cooler, a light fog rolling in from the bay, good for concealment, but it would complicate visibility. As they made their way toward the Pier District in a vehicle from the safe house's garage, Michael thought about the photo of Abby. Despite her fear, he'd seen something in her eyes that gave him hope, the same determination he'd tried to instill in her. Be good, be smart, be kind, and be brave. Hang on, sunshine, he thought. Dad's coming. The warehouse district loomed ahead, a maze of massive buildings and shipping containers. Somewhere in that labyrinth, Cooper and his allies were waiting with Abby, expecting to spring their trap on Elizabeth. Instead, they would find that they had underestimated both her and the janitor, who had once been a warrior. In the face of danger, the true nature of a person is revealed. Not in grand declarations, but in the simple choice to stand and fight when retreat would be easier. The fog hung thick over the Pier District, shrouding the warehouses in ghostly silence. Michael and Elizabeth approached from the waterside, moving silently between shipping containers that created a maze of metal corridors. Each step brought them closer to Warehouse 17 and to Abby. Michael wore dark tactical clothing from Catherine's safe house supplies, a far cry from his janitor's uniform. With his military posture fully returned and weapons secured against his body, he looked like the soldier he once was, rather than the maintenance worker he'd become. Elizabeth had also changed into practical dark clothing, her hair tucked beneath a cap, all corporate polish gone. Thermal imaging shows 7 heat signatures inside, Elizabeth whispered, checking a tablet connected to Catherine's surveillance equipment. 5 adults clustered near the center. 1 smaller signature, likely Abby, separate from the others, and 1 unusual reading that must be the device. Michael nodded, studying the layout. They've positioned Abby away from the main group. Smart prevents a direct rescue attempt. The explosive is showing a core temperature higher than normal, Elizabeth noted with concern. Chen says that indicates it's been modified beyond our original specs. The revelation added urgency to their already dire situation. Not only was Abby being held hostage, but the device threatening her might be even more dangerous than they had anticipated. Entry points, Michael asked, forcing himself to stay focused on the tactical situation. 3 main doors, all likely monitored, but there's a maintenance hatch on the roof and a loading bay with a partially open delivery door on the east side. Michael considered their options. The loading bay gives us the most cover for approach. I'll go in first, locate Abby, and assess the device. You follow once I confirm positions. 2 minutes behind you, Elizabeth agreed. Chen is standing by for visual confirmation of the device. When they synchronized their watches and communications equipment earpieces that would allow them to stay in contact without using their hands. Then Michael checked his weapons one final time, a 9mm handgun with suppressor and a tactical knife. He hoped he wouldn't need to use either, but hope wasn't a strategy. If anything happens to me, he said quietly, the evidence against Cooper and the others is in Catherine's secure cloud storage. The access codes are in the notebook at the safe house. Make sure Abby is taken care of. Elizabeth held his gaze steadily. Nothing will happen to you or Abby. We're going to stop these people and make them pay for what they did to Catherine and your men. Michael nodded, grateful for her confidence, even if he couldn't fully share it. Remember, 2 minutes, then follow. If you hear shooting aboard, and call the authorities. Understood, Elizabeth said. Be careful. Michael moved silently toward the warehouse, using the containers for cover. The loading bay door was partially open as expected, creating a gap just wide enough for him to slip through. Inside the warehouse was dimly lit with towering shelves, creating aisles throughout the space. The central area had been cleared, a pool of brighter light, illuminating what appeared to be a makeshift command center. From his position in the shadows, Michael could make out 4 men. James Cooper paced nervously, checking his watch every few seconds. Two armed men in tactical gear stood at attention, professional security or mercenaries, Michael guessed. And at a laptop sat Alexander Reed, CEO of Vertex Systems, his expression cold and calculating. But where was Simon Hudson? The thermal imaging had shown 5 adult signatures, not 4. Moving carefully from shadow to shadow, Michael worked his way around the perimeter searching for Abby. He found her in a small office area off the main floor, seated on a chair, with her hands zip-tied to the armrests. A guard stood at the door, the 5th heat signature, and beside Abby on a metal table sat the explosive device, its digital display counting down to 58, 41. Michael's heart clenched at the sight of his daughter. She looked frightened but unharmed, her jaw set in a determined expression that reminded him painfully of Sarah. Abby was being brave just as they'd practiced. Now he needed to be worthy of that bravery. He activated his earpiece. I have visual on the target and the package. 1 guard. 4 tangos in the main area. No sign of the brother. Elizabeth's voice came through clearly. Understood. I'm approaching the entry point now. Chen is standing by for visual on the device. Michael assessed the situation. The guard was alert, but positioned so that his back was partially to the shadowed area where Michael could approach. The distance to Abby was approximately 15 feet. He could cross it in seconds if necessary. The challenge would be neutralizing the guard silently and then addressing the explosive. He was about to make his move when voices from the main area grew louder. Cooper and Reed were arguing. This is taking too long, Cooper snapped. She should have made contact by now. Patience, Reed replied coolly. Hudson won't abandon the child. She's too principled for that. And if she's contacted the authorities instead, Cooper demanded, then the backup plan goes into effect, Reed said, nodding toward the explosive device visible through the office window. Either way, we get what we need. The casual way Reed referenced potentially killing Abby made Michael's blood boil, but he forced himself to remain focused. Emotion would not help his daughter now. Strategy would. Michael waited until the guard checked his phone, a momentary distraction, then moved silently across the space. One quick motion, and he had the man in a chokehold, cutting off blood flow to the brain. The guard struggled briefly before going limp. Michael lowered him silently to the floor, securing him with the guard's own zip ties and gagging him with a cloth. Daddy, Abby whispered, her eyes wide with relief and fear. Shh, sunshine, Michael murmured quickly, cutting her restraints with his tactical knife. I'm here. Are you hurt? Abby shook her head, tears streaming down her face. They said they had hurt you if I made noise. You did exactly right, Michael assured her, quickly checking her for injuries despite her assurance. I'm so proud of you for being brave. He activated his earpiece again. Package secured. 1 hostile neutralized. Moving to phase 2. Entering now, Elizabeth confirmed. 30 seconds to your position. Michael turned his attention to the explosive device. It was smaller than he'd expected, about the size of a briefcase, but he recognized military-grade components. The digital display continued its countdown, 27, 56, 26. He activated the camera on his tactical vest, transmitting images to Dr. Chen. Visual established. What are we looking at, Doctor? A new voice came through his earpiece, Dr. Chen, her tone clipped and professional. It's definitely our prototype, but heavily modified. They've added a secondary triggering mechanism and bypassed some of the safety protocols. I need Miss Hudson's biometric authentication to begin the disarming process. As if on cue, Elizabeth slipped into the office area, her eyes immediately finding Abby. A brief smile of relief crossed her face before she focused on the device. Status, she asked quietly. Less than an hour on the timer, Michael reported. Chen says they have modified it. Elizabeth nodded, already moving to the device. Abby, I need you to stay very quiet and do exactly what your father tells you. Okay. Abby nodded solemnly, pressing closer to Michael's side. Elizabeth placed her palm on a barely visible scanner on the device's surface, then leaned in for a retinal scan. The device beeped softly and a compartment opened, revealing a complex array of circuitry. I have access, Elizabeth murmured. Chen, are you seeing this? Yes, the doctor's voice confirmed. They've rerouted the main power through the secondary detonator. Removing the primary won't stop it. I need you to locate the blue and red wiring harness and carefully disconnect the optical coupling. Michael kept watch on the door while Elizabeth worked one arm around Abby protectively. Through the window, he could see Cooper and Reed still in the main area, now joined by the 2 security personnel. in what appeared to be a heated discussion. "Something's wrong," Michael said quietly. "They're agitated." "Almost done," Elizabeth replied, her fingers moving delicately among the wires. "Chen, I've disconnected the coupling." "What's next?" "That should have slowed the countdown." Chen's voice came through confusion evident. "But the timer is still running at normal speed." Michael checked the display to 14, to 13. The countdown continued unabated. "They must have added a tertiary system," Elizabeth realized. "Something independent of the main circuitry." "Can you bypass it?" Michael asked urgently. Elizabeth's expression was grim. "Not without more time and equipment. We need to get Abby out of here now." Michael nodded. "New plan. We take Abby and retreat the way we came in. Contact authorities once we're clear." "What about the evidence?" Elizabeth asked. "If that device detonates, it could destroy everything in this building." "Abby is the priority, Victor," Michael said firmly. Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before nodding. "You're right. Let's move." They were preparing to leave when a new voice spoke from the doorway. "Leaving so soon, that would be disappointing after all the trouble we went through to arrange this reunion." Simon Hudson stood in the doorway, a pistol held casually at his side. Unlike his sister's composed appearance, Simon looked disheveled with bloodshot eyes and a day's growth of beard. But there was a dangerous intelligence in his gaze as it shifted from Elizabeth to Michael to Abby. "Simon," Elizabeth said, her voice carefully controlled, "you don't need to do this. Whatever Reed and Cooper are paying you, I can match it." Simon laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Always the pragmatic businesswoman, Lizzie. "But this isn't just about money. It's about recognition, about finally stepping out of your shadow." His gaze shifted to Michael. "And you must be the janitor who's caused us so much trouble. Except you're not really a janitor, are you? Former Special Forces, I believe." "Cooper was quite concerned when he realized who you were." Michael positioned himself subtly to shield Abby. "Your partners killed my teammates and your own sister," he said. "Did you know that?" A flicker of something doubt perhaps crossed Simon's face before his expression hardened again. "Catherine was always on Lizzie's side. The perfect daughters, while I was the disappointment." "That's not true," Elizabeth said softly. "We tried to help you, Simon. Both of us did." "Help me," Simon's voice rose. "You controlled me. Every time I needed money, there were conditions, rehab programs, therapy sessions. Like I was broken and needed fixing." "You were destroying yourself," Elizabeth countered. "We couldn't stand by and watch." Simon's grip tightened on his weapon. "And now you don't have to. Once you're gone, Hudson Technologies will have a new CEO, me, with Vertex as our primary partner, of course." Michael assessed the situation rapidly. Simon was blocking their only exit. The explosive was still counting down. And Cooper and Rita would surely investigate any commotion. "The girl doesn't need to be involved," Michael said calmly. "Let Abby go and we can discuss this like adults." Simon's gaze flickered to Abby, who was pressing herself against Michael's side, eyes wide with fear. "The child is our insurance policy," Simon said, but with less conviction, "until everything is finalized." Michael recognized the opening. Simon wasn't a hardened killer like Reed or the security personnel. He was a desperate man making terrible choices, but perhaps not beyond reach. "She's 9 years old, Simon," Michael said quietly. "The same age Elizabeth was when your parents first brought you home. Remember that day Elizabeth probably told Abby about it. It was a shot in the dark, but Michael had seen the family photos in Catherine's album. The gambit worked." Simon's expression shifted, uncertainty replacing determination. "How did you?" he began. "I know about your family," Michael continued, his voice steady and non-threatening. "I know Catherine kept photos of all of you together. Happy times before things got complicated." Elizabeth caught on immediately. "Remember the sailing trip to Lake Michigan? Simon Dad taught us all to navigate by the stars. You were the quickest learner." Simon's hand trembled slightly. He said I had a natural talent. "You did," Elizabeth affirmed. "You still do. Your brilliance was never the issue, Simon, and I never wanted to control you. I just wanted my brother back." The tension in the room was palpable. Michael could see Simon wavering, the conflict evident in his eyes. This was their chance. "Let us take Abby out of here," Michael suggested gently. "Then you and Elizabeth can talk, really talk without Reed and Cooper's influence." For a moment it seemed Simon might agree. Then shouting erupted from the main warehouse area, followed by the sound of running feet. "Simon, we have a perimeter breach," Cooper's voice called. Security sensors picked up movement outside. The moment shattered. Simon's expression hardened again, his grip on the gun steadying. Move away from the device, he ordered. All of you into the main area, now. Michael exchanged a glance with Elizabeth. They had no choice but to comply for now. He squeezed Abby's shoulder reassuringly as they moved past Simon into the warehouse. Cooper and Reed were waiting with the security personnel all armed and looking tense. The police? Reed asked sharply when he saw them. Unlikely, Simon replied. Probably Hudson's security team. She must have activated some protocol before coming here. Elizabeth kept her face carefully neutral, not confirming or denying the assumption. Michael did the same, though internally he was recalculating their options. If someone was indeed outside, it could create either an opportunity or additional complications. It doesn't matter, Reed decided. We accelerate the timeline. The device detonates in 45 minutes, more than enough time to conclude our business and be well clear of the blast radius. Cooper looked less certain. The authorities will investigate an explosion of that magnitude. They'll find evidence of a tragic accident, Reed said dismissively. Industrial chemicals stored improperly. Very unfortunate, especially with the CEO of Hudson Technologies and her young friend caught in the blast. The casual cruelty of the statement made Michael's jaw clench. Beside him, he felt Abby tremble and he placed a protective hand on her shoulder. What about our agreement? Simon demanded. I was supposed to take over Hudson Technologies intact, not a smoking ruin. Reed smiled thinly. Plans evolve, Mr. Hudson. The intellectual property is what matters, and that's already been secured. Your sister's unfortunate demise will simply accelerate the transition. Simon's expression shifted as he realized he too had been manipulated. You never intended to make me CEO. Let's just say your history made you a less than ideal candidate for long-term leadership, Reed replied, but you've been very useful in the short term. Sometimes betrayal comes not from our enemies, but from those who promise to be our allies. The sting is sharper when we realize we should have seen it coming. The revelation of Reed's true intentions created a new dynamic in the warehouse. Simon now stood apart from Cooper and Reed, his loyalties visibly shifting as he processed the betrayal. Michael observed the changing alliances looking for an opening. The explosive device was still the primary threat, but with multiple armed hostiles, a direct confrontation was too risky with Abby present. A commotion outside drew everyone's attention, the sound of vehicles arriving, doors slamming, voices calling out. Security teams here, one of the guards reported checking a monitor. At least 6 individuals approaching from the east and south. Reed's expression darkened. Secure the hostages. Cooper, prepare for exfiltration. We're moving to Contingency Plan Delta. As the men moved to comply, Michael caught Elizabeth's eye, a silent communication passing between them. If they were going to act, it had to be now while their captors were distracted. The lights in the warehouse suddenly went out, plunging the space into darkness, broken only by emergency exit signs and the glow of computer screens. A moment later, the building's fire alarm began to wail. The darkness was Michael's element. In one fluid motion, he pulled Abby to the ground and covered her with his body. Stay down and don't move, he whispered in her ear. Shouts of confusion filled the warehouse as the security personnel tried to restore order. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping wildly across the space. Michael seized the opportunity, moving silently toward the nearest guard. One precise strike, and the man crumpled his weapon, now in Michael's hands. Elizabeth had also acted, diving behind a stack of crates for cover. Michael, she called. The device? The countdown was still active now, approaching 35 minutes. Without power to the main lights, the device's display glowed ominously in the darkness. Gunfire erupted at the warehouse entrance, Reed's men engaging whoever had arrived outside. The chaos provided cover for Michael to move back to Abby, guiding her toward Elizabeth's position. We need to get to the loading bay exit, he told Elizabeth when they were together behind the crates. It's our best chance, Risha. What about the device? Elizabeth asked. We can't just leave it. If we can get Abby out, I'll come back for it, Michael promised. A figure appeared suddenly beside them, causing Michael to raise his weapon defensively. It was Simon, his face pale in the emergency lighting. There's another way out, he said urgently. A maintenance tunnel that connects to the adjacent building. Reed doesn't know about it. Michael kept his weapon trained on Simon. Why would you help us? Because Reed betrayed me, Simon said bitterly. And because, he hesitated, looking at Elizabeth. Because she's still my sister. Elizabeth studied her brother's face. Can we trust him? She asked Michael. Before Michael could answer, another burst of gunfire erupted closer this time. Someone screamed in pain. We don't have much choice, Michael decided. Lead the way, but understand this. If you're lying, if you put my daughter in danger, I will not hesitate to stop you permanently. Simon nodded, genuine fear in his eyes. This way, quickly. They followed Simon through the darkness, Michael carrying Abby while Elizabeth covered their rear. The gunfire continued at the main entrance, suggesting Reed's security was engaged in a serious firefight with the new arrivals. Simon led them to what appeared to be a storage closet at the back of the warehouse. Inside, he moved aside shelving to reveal a metal door. Maintenance access, he explained. It runs to the utility room in the building next door. Michael examined the door suspiciously. Open it, he ordered Simon. You go first. Simon complied, pulling the heavy door open to reveal a narrow concrete tunnel lit by sparse emergency bulbs. He stepped in without hesitation, glancing back at them. It's about 50 yards to the other end. Michael handed the weapon he'd taken to Elizabeth. Cover us, he said quietly. I'll carry Abby. Elizabeth nodded, taking the gun with practiced ease. Be careful. The tunnel was cramped and damp, forcing them to move in single file. Simon led, followed by Michael carrying Abby with Elizabeth bringing up the rear. The sounds of the firefight grew more distant as they progressed. Why did you do it, Simon? Elizabeth asked as they moved. Why work with Reed against your own family? Simon didn't slow his pace. It started small. I needed money. He offered it in exchange for information about Hudson's projects. Then it escalated. Before I knew it, I was in too deep to back out. You could have come to me, Elizabeth said. Would you have understood, Simon countered, the perfect Elizabeth Hudson, who never makes mistakes? I make plenty of mistakes, Elizabeth replied quietly, including not seeing how much you were hurting. The simple admission seemed to affect Simon deeply. He fell silent as they continued through the tunnel. They were halfway to the exit when Michael's earpiece crackled to life. It was Dr. Chen. Ms. Hudson, Mr. Kane. The device's signature has changed. They've remotely accelerated the countdown. You have less than 10 minutes before detonation. Michael's blood ran cold. We need to move faster, he urged. The bomb's countdown has been accelerated. They increased their pace, nearly running through the confined space. As they approached the exit, Simon suddenly stopped. What is it? Michael demanded. I need to go back, Simon said, his voice strained. The detonation sequence, I can interrupt it. I helped Reed modify the device. I know how to disarm it. That's suicide, Elizabeth protested. Simon, no. It's the only way to ensure you get clear in time, Simon insisted. And it's the right thing to do, maybe the first right thing I've done in years. Michael studied Simon's face, looking for deception, but finding only resolve and regret. How do we know you can actually disarm it? Michael asked. You don't, Simon admitted. But Elizabeth has the evidence to bring down Reed and Cooper regardless. At least this way, there's a chance to prevent the explosion. Elizabeth grasped her brother's arm. Simon, please, we can find another way. Simon smiled sadly. There isn't time, Lizzie. Get the girl to safety. I'll buy you as much time as I can. Before Elizabeth could protest further, Simon had turned and was running back through the tunnel. Simon, Elizabeth called after him, but Michael caught her arm. We need to get Abby out, he reminded her. That's the priority. Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes, but she nodded, turning her attention back to the exit door. Together they pushed it open, emerging into the utility room of the adjacent warehouse. This building was quiet and empty, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind. Michael set Abby down, but kept her hand firmly in his. Are we safe now, Daddy? Abby asked, her voice small. Almost sunshine, Michael assured her. We just need to get a little farther away. They made their way through the building, finding an exit that led to a side street away from the ongoing confrontation. In the distance, they could hear police sirens approaching. Elizabeth activated her secure phone. Chen, we're clear of the building. What's the status of the device? Still counting down, Chen reported grimly. 7 minutes remaining. But wait, something's changed. Someone's accessing the internal controls manually. Simon, Elizabeth whispered. Can he stop it? Michael asked urgently. It's possible, Chen replied. He's bypassing the acceleration protocol, reverting to the original countdown. That buys us more time, but doesn't disarm it completely. They reached a safe distance, just as police vehicles began to cordon off the area. Elizabeth immediately approached the officers, identifying herself and explaining the situation. Michael stayed with Abby, holding her close as if afraid she might disappear again. "Daddy," Abby said, looking up at him with eyes too wise for her years, "is the man who helped us going to be okay?" Michael couldn't bring himself to lie to his daughter. "I don't know, Sunshine. He's trying to do something very brave and very difficult." Abby nodded solemnly. "Like when you were a soldier." "Something like that," Michael agreed, his throat tight with emotion. Elizabeth returned to them, her expression grim. "They're evacuating the area. Bomb squad is on the way, but they may not get here in time." Michael looked back at the warehouse they'd escaped from, thinking about Simon alone with the device, trying to undo the damage he'd helped create. "I should go back," he said. "I have explosive ordnance training. I might be able to help." "No," Elizabeth said firmly, placing a hand on his arm. "You've risked enough. Abby needs you here." As if to punctuate her words, the night was suddenly illuminated by a brilliant flash as the warehouse exploded. The concussive force knocked them to the ground, Michael instinctively covering Abby with his body. The roar of the explosion was deafening, followed by the crash of debris and the wail of car alarms activated by the shockwave. When Michael looked up, the warehouse was engulfed in flames, black smoke billowing into the night sky. Firefighters were already racing toward the blaze, though it was clear nothing could be saved. Elizabeth stared at the inferno, tears streaming down her face. "Simon," she whispered. "Oh, Simon." Michael helped her to her feet, supporting her as she swayed with shock and grief. Abby pressed against his side, her small face buried in his jacket. The explosion had changed everything. Simon was gone. Reed and Cooper, if they'd still been inside, might have perished as well. But the evidence Elizabeth had gathered remained secured in Catherine's encrypted cloud storage. As emergency services swarmed the area, Michael held Abby and Elizabeth close, a makeshift family forged in crisis. They had survived, but at a terrible cost. And though the immediate danger had passed, Michael knew their ordeal wasn't over. Justice for Catherine, for his fallen comrades, and now for Simon, still awaited them. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, Michael felt something he'd thought long lost: purpose. The greatest courage is not found in grand heroic gestures, but in the quiet determination to protect those we love, even when the cost is unimaginably high. Dawn broke over the city, painting the skyline in hues of gold and rose that belied the chaos of the previous night. Michael sat in an uncomfortable chair in the hospital waiting room, watching Abby sleep on the adjacent seats. The doctors had examined her and found no physical injuries beyond minor scrapes and bruises, but they wanted to monitor her for shock. Michael himself had refused medical attention despite the cuts and bruises that mapped his own ordeal. His body had endured worse during his military career, and his focus remained entirely on Abby's well-being. Every few minutes, he would reach out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, reassuring himself that she was truly safe. 3 rooms down the hall, Elizabeth Hudson was meeting with FBI agents, providing them with the evidence she had gathered against Reed Cooper and the others involved in the conspiracy. The explosion at the warehouse had dominated the morning news, described as an industrial accident under investigation. No mention had been made yet of attempted murder, corporate espionage, or the connection to Operation Nightshade. Michael's thoughts turned to Simon Hudson. The man had betrayed his sister, conspired with criminals, and endangered Abby's life. Yet in the end, he had chosen to stay behind to try to prevent the explosion. Had he succeeded even partially? Had his final act been one of redemption? The investigators picking through the rubble might eventually provide answers, but for now, Simon remained a contradiction villain and victim, betrayer, and savior. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Kane, there's someone here to see you and your daughter, a Dr. Naomi Chen." Michael nodded, recognizing the name of Elizabeth's head researcher who had helped them remotely during the crisis. "She can come in." Dr. Chen was a petite woman with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. She carried herself with the precise movements of someone accustomed to working with delicate equipment. She nodded respectfully to Michael before taking a seat across from him. "How is she?" Dr. Chen asked, glancing at Abby. "Physically fine," Michael replied. "Emotionally, it's too soon to tell. Children are resilient, but this kind of trauma leaves marks." Chen nodded, understanding. "I've spoken with Ms. Hudson. She asked me to update you while she finishes with the federal agents." "What's happening with Reed and Cooper?" Michael asked. "Reed was not in the warehouse when it exploded," Chen revealed. He was apprehended trying to board a private jet at a small airfield outside the city. Cooper, she hesitated. They found remains in the warehouse. DNA confirmation is pending, but it appears he didn't make it out. Michael absorbed this information, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret at Cooper's fate. And the evidence, irrefutable, Chen confirmed. Elizabeth provided the FBI with documentation linking Reed Cooper and several others to both the attempt on her life and the compromise of Operation Nightshade 2 years ago. The investigation has expanded to include the Department of Defense and several government contractors who may have been involved. Michael's jaw tightened at the mention of the operation that had claimed Catherine's life and ended his military career. Will it be enough? To convict Reed, absolutely. To uncover everyone involved in the original operation, that remains to be seen. Chen adjusted her glasses. But that's not why I'm here. Ms. Hudson asked me to give you this. She handed Michael a small flash drive. It contains a job offer, formal this time, with all the details spelled out. Head of Security for Hudson Technologies. Ms. Hudson is quite insistent. Michael accepted the drive but didn't respond immediately. The events of the past days had changed him, awakened parts of himself he'd thought long buried. But was he ready to step back into a world of responsibility and danger? There's something else you should know, Chen continued when Michael remained silent. Preliminary analysis of the explosive device suggests Simon Hudson did manage to partially disarm it. The blast was approximately 40% of what it should have been based on the materials used. He saved lives, including potentially those of the first responders who were approaching the building. This news struck Michael deeply. Simon, for all his flaws and mistakes, had found courage in his final moments. Perhaps redemption was possible, even for those who had strayed far from their better selves. Tell Elizabeth thank you, Michael said finally, for everything. I'll consider the offer once Abby is fully recovered. Chen nodded, rising to leave. For what it's worth, Mr. Kane, Ms. Hudson rarely takes no for an answer. And in this case, I think she's right. Hudson Technologies needs someone like you. After Chen departed, Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind drifting to the uncertain future ahead. The simple life he had built as a janitor was gone forever. The question now was, what would take its place? On the bench beside him, Abby stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Daddy, she mumbled sleepily. I'm right here, sunshine, Michael assured her, taking her small hand in his. Abby looked around, orienting herself to the hospital surroundings. Is the bad man gone? Michael hesitated, unsure which bad man she meant, Reed Cooper or even Simon. The danger is over, he said carefully. You're safe now. Abby seemed to accept this, but then asked a question that caught Michael off guard. Is Ms. Elizabeth okay? She was crying about her brother. The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze him. She's sad, Michael explained gently. Her brother made some bad choices, but in the end he tried to do something good. Sometimes people are complicated like that. Abby considered this with the serious contemplation only a child can bring to philosophical matters. Like when I pushed Jessie last year because she took my pencil, but then I felt bad and gave her my special eraser. Despite everything, Michael found himself smiling. Something like that, sunshine. Just on a much bigger scale. Is Ms. Elizabeth going to be our friend now? Abby asked. Before Michael could formulate an answer, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. I'd like that very much, Abby, Elizabeth said, entering the room. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her normally perfect appearance somewhat disheveled. But there was a strength in her posture, a resilience that remained unbroken. How did it go with the FBI? Michael asked. As well as could be expected, Elizabeth replied, taking the seat Dr. Chen had vacated. They have enough to prosecute Reed. The rest will take time. Investigations of this magnitude always do. She turned her attention to Abby, smiling gently. The doctors tell me you're being very brave. Abby nodded solemnly. Dad says I get it from Mom, and from him too. I believe that, Elizabeth said. Then to Michael. Has Dr. Chen been to see you? Yes, Michael confirmed. She gave me your offer. And Elizabeth prompted, and I told her I'd think about it. Elizabeth looked like she wanted to press the issue, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, she changed the subject. The doctors say Abby can be discharged today. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? Your apartment might not be secure yet. Michael hadn't considered this. In the chaos of the past 24 hours, practical matters had taken a back seat to survival. Mrs. Martinez might, he began, but Elizabeth shook her head. I've arranged a secure location, she said, a property owned by Hudson Technologies used for visiting executives. It's comfortable, private, and has excellent security. You and Abby would be welcome to stay there while things settle down. The offer was generous and practical. Michael's instinct was to refuse. He had always made his own way, solved his own problems. But looking at Abby, he recognized that pride had to yield to pragmatism. His daughter deserved safety and stability. Thank you, he said simply. We accept. Elizabeth appeared relieved. Good, it's all arranged, and Michael, thank you for everything. The gratitude in her eyes spoke of more than just the events of the past days. It encompassed the connection to Catherine, the unexpected alliance they had formed, and perhaps something more that neither of them was ready to name. Sometimes the most important journeys begin not with a grand departure, but with a simple decision to take the next step forward wherever it might lead. 3 weeks later, Michael stood at the window of the executive residence, watching Abby play in the spacious garden. The property was a modernist structure of glass and stone set on a quiet street in an affluent neighborhood. It felt like another world compared to their small apartment, yet Abby had adapted with the remarkable flexibility of childhood. The same could not be said for Michael. Despite the comfort and security of their temporary home, he felt unsettled, caught between the life he had left behind and an uncertain future. The flash drive with Elizabeth's job offer remained unopened on the desk in his room. The sound of the front door opening announced Elizabeth's arrival. She had visited regularly over the past week, sometimes to discuss the ongoing investigation, sometimes simply to spend time with Abby, who had grown increasingly comfortable in her presence. How is she today? Elizabeth asked, joining Michael at the window. Better, Michael replied. The nightmares are less frequent. The therapist says she's processing everything remarkably well. Children are resilient, Elizabeth observed, perhaps more so than adults. Michael recognized the opening she was providing. If you're asking whether I've made a decision about your offer, the answer is not yet. Elizabeth sighed. It's been 3 weeks, Michael. What's holding you back? He turned to face her directly. I spent years trying to leave that life behind. The hypervigilance, the constant assessment of threats, the responsibility for others' safety. Being a janitor was simple, anonymous, and lonely, Elizabeth added softly, for both you and Abby. The observation struck close to home. It was true that their life, while stable in its way, had been isolated. Michael worked 2 jobs, leaving little time for socializing. Abby had few friends, partly due to her quiet nature after Sarah's death, partly due to the transient nature of their neighborhood. You're good at what you do, Michael, Elizabeth continued. Not just the security aspects, but the judgment, the compassion, the ability to see people for who they really are. Hudson Technologies needs that, especially now. In the weeks since the warehouse incident, Elizabeth had begun the difficult process of restructuring her company. With Cooper dead and several other executives implicated in the conspiracy, Hudson Technologies was facing a leadership vacuum. The Pentagon contract had been temporarily suspended pending the investigation, though Elizabeth was confident it would be reinstated once the company had been cleared of systemic involvement. And what about you? Michael asked. What do you need? The question seemed to catch Elizabeth off guard. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure faltered, revealing the weight she carried. I need someone I can trust, she admitted. The betrayals Cooper, Simon, others on my executive team, they have left me questioning my judgment. You're the only person who has consistently shown integrity through all of this. Because of Catherine, Michael suggested. Elizabeth shook her head. No, Catherine may have been the connection that brought us together, but your actions stand on their own merit. You risked everything for your daughter, and then for me, a woman you barely knew. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable. Michael turned back to the window, watching Abby, who was now collecting fallen leaves into careful piles. I'll need a schedule that allows me to be there for Abby, he said finally. School drop-offs, events, emergencies, those take priority. Elizabeth's face brightened. Of course, we can structure the position however you need. And I want a complete security overhaul, Michael continued. Not just physical security, but personnel, vetting, information systems, everything. If I'm responsible for safety, I need full authority to implement changes. Done, Elizabeth agreed immediately. Anything else? Michael thought for a moment. Yes, I want a college fund established for Abby. Regardless of what happens with this position, her education should be secured. Elizabeth smiled. Already taken care of. I set up a trust for her the day after the warehouse. It can't be touched except for educational expenses, even by me. The revelation surprised Michael. You didn't need to do that. I wanted to, Elizabeth said simply. So does this mean you accept the position? Michael extended his hand. It does, but I reserve the right to adapt the role as needed. Elizabeth took his hand, her grip firm and confident. I wouldn't have it any other way, Mr. Kane. The formal address made them both smile, a reminder of how far they had come from the CEO and janitor who had first faced each other in her office. From the garden, Abby called out, waving for them to join her. Without discussion, they both moved toward the door, responding to the simple invitation with a synchronicity that felt natural, as if they had been a team far longer than a few tumultuous weeks. In the weeks that followed, Michael threw himself into his new role with the same dedication he had once brought to his military service. He restructured Hudson Technologies' security department from the ground up, implementing protocols that balanced protection with practicality. His background gave him credibility with the security staff, while his recent experience as a janitor provided unique insights into the company's vulnerabilities. Elizabeth, for her part, led the company through the turbulent aftermath of the conspiracy with steady determination. The federal investigation continued expanding to include officials at the Department of Defense who had connections to Reed and Vertex systems. The evidence Catherine had gathered before her death proved invaluable, suggesting she had suspected the conspiracy long before it claimed her life. Michael and Abby moved into a new home not as grand as the executive residence, but far more comfortable than their old apartment. Located in a safe neighborhood with good schools, it represented a fresh start for both of them. Mrs. Martinez visited often, bringing homemade meals and doting on Abby as if she were her own grandchild. Life began to settle into a new routine, different but increasingly comfortable. Michael found himself sleeping better, the nightmares of his final mission gradually receding. Abby blossomed in her new school, making friends and even joining the science club. In preparation for the summer camp, she would attend the same one she had dreamed of before their world had turned upside down. 6 months after the warehouse explosion, Elizabeth invited Michael and Abby to a special ceremony at Hudson Technologies headquarters. The company had established a foundation in Catherine's name dedicated to supporting veterans transitioning to civilian life and children who had lost parents in military service. As they stood in the elegant reception hall after the ceremony, watching Abby interact confidently with the other guests, Elizabeth spoke quietly to Michael. I received an interesting report from the reconstruction team at the warehouse site, she said. They found something in the debris that survived the explosion. Michael raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? A metal case, Elizabeth explained, heavily reinforced. Inside was a journal, Simon's journal. Most of it was destroyed, but there were entries about Catherine. It seems she had confronted Simon about his involvement with Reed years ago, tried to get him to come clean to me. Did he? Michael asked. Elizabeth shook her head sadly. No, but according to what's legible in the journal, he regretted it deeply after her death. He suspected she was killed because of what she knew, but he was too afraid of Reed to act. Until the end, Michael observed. Until the end, Elizabeth agreed. The final entry, dated the day before the warehouse, says simply, if I don't survive this, at least Catherine will know I finally found some courage. The revelation settled between them, another piece of the complex puzzle that had brought them together. Simon, like so many, had been flawed, compromised, but not beyond the reach of conscience. There's something else, Elizabeth continued after a moment. The Pentagon contract has been reinstated. The Defense Committee was impressed with our handling of the crisis, bosses, and the security improvements you've implemented. That's excellent news, Michael said, genuinely pleased for her. The contract represented not just financial security for Hudson Technologies, but vindication of Elizabeth's leadership. There's a celebration dinner next week with the Pentagon officials, Elizabeth said, a hint of hesitation in her voice. I was hoping you might accompany me. The invitation hung in the air, its significance evident in Elizabeth's slightly tense posture. This would be more than a professional engagement. I'd be honored, Michael said. Then with a smile, but I'll need to find a babysitter for Abby. Actually, Elizabeth replied, relaxing visibly, I thought Abby might like to join us. The general's daughter is about her age and they're having a separate dinner for the children in an adjoining room. It might be good for her to meet other military families. The thoughtfulness of the suggestion touched Michael deeply. Elizabeth hadn't just considered his professional role or even their evolving personal relationship. She had thought of Abby, of how to include her in this new chapter of their lives. In that case, we accept, Michael said warmly. Both of us. Elizabeth's smile illuminated her entire face, reminding Michael that beneath the polished exterior of the powerful CEO was a woman with hopes and vulnerabilities of her own. Across the room, Abby looked up from her conversation with one of the foundation staff and waved enthusiastically at them. Without hesitation, Elizabeth waved back the gesture, natural and affectionate. In that moment, Michael saw with perfect clarity what had been gradually taking shape over the past months, not just a professional partnership or a friendship born of crisis, but the foundations of something deeper, something that might one day become a family. The thought should have frightened him. After Sarah's death, he had closed that door in his heart, focusing all his love and energy on Abby. But watching Elizabeth interact with his daughter, seeing the genuine connection between them, Michael felt not fear, but possibility. 1 year to the day after Michael had shouted his warning in the Hudson Technologies parking garage, a small gathering took place on a quiet beach at sunset. Present were only those closest to Michael and Elizabeth. Abby, of course, Mrs. Martinez, Dr. Chen, and a few trusted friends and colleagues who had supported them through the aftermath of the conspiracy. They had come to honor Catherine Hudson with a private memorial. The military had provided one years earlier, formal and dignified, but Elizabeth had wanted something more personal, a recognition not just of how her sister had died, but of how she had lived. One by one, they shared memories of Catherine, her intelligence, her courage, her unexpected sense of humor. Elizabeth spoke of childhood adventures and sibling rivalries that had evolved into deep respect. Dr. Chen recalled Catherine's enthusiasm for the technology they were developing and her insistence that it be used ethically. When it came to Michael's turn, he spoke simply, but with deep emotion about the woman who had saved his life and the lives of his teammates who had shown extraordinary courage in the face of danger and whose final act of service had created an unexpected legacy. Catherine connected all of us, he concluded, looking around the small circle. Her life, her work, her choices led to this moment, to these relationships. She couldn't have known how things would unfold, but I think she would be proud of what has grown from the seeds she planted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden rays across the water, Elizabeth placed a wreath of white flowers on the gentle waves. They watched in silence as it floated outward, carrying their memories and gratitude into the vastness of the ocean. Afterward, as the group made their way back to the canoes, Abby slipped her hand into Elizabeth's, a gesture that had become natural over the past months. With her other hand, she held on to Michael, creating a physical link between the three of them. "Are we a family now?" Abby asked with the direct simplicity of a child. Michael and Elizabeth exchanged glances over her head, a world of communication passing between them in that brief look. "What do you think, Sunshine?" Michael asked gently. Abby considered this seriously. "I think we are," she decided. "Not like before with Mom, but still good. Different, but good." "Different, but good," Elizabeth repeated softly. "I like that." Michael squeezed Abby's hand, then reached across to take Elizabeth's as well, completing the circle. "So do I." As they walked together along the beach, their footprints making a single path in the sand, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. From janitor to security chief, from grieving widower to a man open to new possibilities. From strangers bound by tragedy to something far more meaningful. The road ahead would not always be smooth. The shadows of the past, Catherine's death, Sarah's loss, Simon's betrayal and redemption, would always be part of their story. But so too would the courage, integrity, and compassion that had brought them through the darkest times. For Michael Caine, who had once believed his purpose ended with his military service, who had accepted invisibility as the price of peace, life had revealed an unexpected truth. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism are not dramatic rescues or battlefield valor, but the quiet, consistent choice to begin again, to trust again, to love again. And as the three of them walked toward the future together, their silhouettes merging in the fading light, it was clear that the most important mission of his life was just beginning. The true measure of a life well lived is not found in wealth or status or power, but in the lives we touch, the love we share, and the courage to rise again after we fall.